Hello, everybody. This is Sunko, and today is October 19th, Tuesday. Let me tell you what I've been up to these days, instead of talking about the thing that I like about Korea. Because to be honest, I didn't bring anything. But I'm going to talk about stuff that's going around with me these days instead. I've got a lot of things to talk about, so I'm going to talk that thing tonight, but then for real, I'm going to bring something tomorrow, okay? And okay, I really didn't introduce myself to you ever before because I wanted to um separate my privacy and my work life. And speaking like this in front of camera and out into YouTube world is a really big step, because if I say something wrong, it's gonna be on public, and before I know it, something big could actually happen. So I really wanted to separate things, but then there are some things that I can talk about in public as well. So I'm not going to talk about it a little bit. My job is about computer science, and what I do is software, hardware, and fixing computer, and fixing software, fixing hardware, and that kind of thing. I'll just leave it as it is, but then I'm gonna um, explain in detail later on. But then I'll just leave it as it is. Uh, and well, it's not that I've been up to like my work, because my it's my daily thingy that goes on in my life every day. But I do my work in the morning, in the afternoon, and throughout the day. And on weekends, I hang out with my girlfriend and um studying software, and of course doing YouTube, and mm, doing workout really hard. Uh, that's pretty much things that I've been up to. I mean, it's some would say that it's a boring life, but for me, uh, it's a daily habit which makes me who I am today. Because if I was not that uh diligent person, I would not been able to sit here and talking like this. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's the thing that goes around in my life. And what's happening in Korea uh is the second thing. The second thing is that uh these days Korea is really cold. Recently weather has changed so fast. Like, from what I remember, yesterday or the day before yesterday, I wore short clothes, shorts, and t-shirt. But then the next day, in the morning, what I found was really cold weather. I mean, it was so surprising. The moment I went out, it was so cold that I had no choice but to come back in and had to wear like layers. Hmm. It's that freaking cold, and according to weather forecast, it's gonna be colder. So, hmm, if you are a foreigner, you must keep in mind that before you come to Korea, it's like winter here. October, November, December, it's gonna get colder. Oh, so yeah, that's the things that goes around in my life and life in Korea. Hmm. And I'll continue reading the book just like the rest of the days. Mm. And also Easter Sunday, all agreed to sanctify the day by rest. These Americans were religious men, scrupulous observers of the precepts of the Bible, and their situation could not but develop sentiments of confidence towards the author of all things. On the evenings of the 15th of April, they returned to the chimneys, carrying with them the pottery, the furnace being extinguished until they could put it to a new use. Their return was marked by a fortunate incident. The engineer discovered a substance which replaced tinder. It is known that a spongy, velvety flesh is procured from a certain mushroom of the genus Polyporus. Properly prepared, it is extremely inflammable, especially when it has been previously saturated with gunpowder or boiled in a solution of nitrate or chlorate of potash. But till then, they had not found any of these polypores, or even any of the morels which could replace them. On this day, the engineers, seeing a plant belonging to the wormwood genus, the principal species of which are absinthe, Bormint, tarragon, etc., gathered several tufts, and presenting them to the sailor, said, "Here, Pencroft, this will please you." Pencroft looked attentively at the plant, covered with long silky hair, the leaves being clothed with soft down. "What's that, captain?" asked Pencroft. "Is it tobacco?" "No," replied Harding. "It is wormwood. Chinese wormwood to the learned, but to us it will be tinder." When the wormwood was properly dried, it provided them with a very inflammable substance, especially afterwards when the engineer had impregnated it with the nitrate of potash, of which the island possessed several beds, and which is in truth saltpeter. The colonists had a good supper that evening. Nat prepared some agouti soup, a smoked capybara ham, to which was added the boiled tubercles of the Caladium macrosum. They had an excellent taste, and were very nutritious, being something similar to the substance which is sold in England under the name of Portland sago. They were also a good substitute for bread, which the settlers in Lincoln Island did not yet possess. When supper was finished, before sleeping, Harding and his companions went to take the air on the beach. It was 8 o'clock in the evening. The night was magnificent. The moon, which had been full 5 days before, had not yet risen, but the horizon was already silvered by those soft, pale shades which might be called the dawn of the moon. At the southern zenith glittered the circumpolar constellations, and above all the Southern Cross, which some days before the engineer had greeted on the summit of Mount Franklin. Cyrus Harding gazed for some time at the splendid constellation, which has at its summit and at its base two stars of the first magnitude, at its left arm a star of the second, and at its right arm a star of the third magnitude. Then, after some minutes' thought, Herbert, he asked of the lid, "Is not this the 15th of April?" "Yes, captain," replied Herbert. "Well, if I'm not mistaken, tomorrow will be one of the 4 days in the year in which the real time is identical with average time. That is to say, my boy, that tomorrow, to within some seconds, the sun will pass the meridian just at midday by the clocks. If the weather is fine, I think that I shall obtain the longitude of the island with an approximation of some degrees." "Without instruments, without sextants?" asked the Gideon Split. "Yes," replied the engineer. "Also, since the night is clear, I will try this every evening to obtain our latitude by calculating the height of the southern cross, that is, from the southern pole above the horizon. You understand, my friends, that before undertaking the work of installation in earnest, it is not enough to have found out that this land is an island. We must, as nearly as possible, know at what distance it is situated, either from the American continent or Australia, or from the principal archipelagos of the Pacific. In fact, said the reporter, instead of building a house, it would be more important to build a boat. If by chance we are not more than 100 miles from an inhabited coast, that is why, returned Harding. I'm going to try this evening to calculate the latitude of Lincoln Island, and tomorrow at midday I will try to calculate the longitude. If the engineer had possessed a sextant and apparatus with which the angular distance of the objects can be measured with great precision, there would have been no difficulty in the operation. This evening by the height of the pole, the next day by the passing of the sun, at the meridian he would obtain the position of the island. But as they had not one, he would have to supply the deficiency. Harding then entered the chimneys. By the light of the fire he cut two little flat rulers, which he joined together at one end so as to form a pair of compasses, whose legs could separate or come together. The fastening was fixed with a strong acacia thorn which was found in the wood pile. This instrument finished, the engineer returned to the beach, but as it was necessary to take the height of the pole from above a clear horizon, that is, a sea horizon, and as Claw Cape hid the southern horizon, he was obliged to look for a more suitable station. The best would evidently have been the shore exposed directly to the south, but the Mersey would have to be crossed, and that was difficulty. Harding resolved, in consequence, to make his observation from Prospect Heights, taking into consideration its height above the level of the sea, a height which he intended to calculate the next day by simple process of elementary geometry. The settlers therefore went to the plateau, ascending the left bank of the Mersey, and placed themselves in an edge which looked northwest and southeast, that is, above the curiously shaped rocks which bordered the river. This part of the plateau commanded the heights of the left bank, which sloped away to the extremity of Claw Cape and to the southern side of the island. No obstacle intercepted their gaze, which swept the horizon in a semicircle from the cape to Reptile End. To the south, the horizon, lighted by the first rays of the moon, was very clearly defined against sky. At this moment, the southern cross presented itself to the observer in an inverted position, the star Alpha marking its base, which is nearer to the southern pole. This constellation is not situated as near to the Antarctic pole as the polar star is to the Arctic pole. The star Alpha is about 27 degrees from it. Besides, Harding knew this and made allowance for it in his calculation. He took care also to observe the moment when he passed the meridian below the pole, which would simplify the operation. Cyrus Harding pointed one leg of the compasses to the horizon, the other to Alpha, and the space between the two legs gave him the angular distance which separated Alpha from the horizon. In order to fix the angle obtained, he fastened with thorns the two pieces of wood on the third placed transversely so that their separation should be properly maintained. That done, there was only the angle to calculate by bringing back to the observation to the level of the sea, taking into consideration the depression of the horizon, which would necessitate measuring the height of the cliff. The value of this angle would give the height of Alpha, and consequently that of the pole above the horizon, that is to say, the latitude of the island, since the latitude of a point of the globe is always equal to the height of the pole above the horizon of this point. The calculations were left for the next day, and at 10 o'clock everyone was sleeping soundly. The next day, the 16th of April, And Easter Sunday, the settlers issued from the chimneys at daybreak and proceeded to wash their linen. The engineer intended to manufacture soap as soon as he could procure the necessary materials, soda or potash feather oil. The important question of renewing their wardrobe would be treated of in the proper time and place. At any rate, their clothes would last at least 6 months longer, for they were strong and could resist the wear of manual labor. But all would depend on the situation of the island with regard to inhabited land. This would be settled today if the weather permitted. The sun rising above a clear horizon announced a magnificent day, one of those beautiful autumn days which are like the last farewells of the warm season. It was now necessary to complete the observations of the evening before by measuring the height of the cliff above the level of the sea. Shall you not need an instrument similar to the one which you used yesterday? Said Herbert to the engineer. No, my boy, replied the latter. We're going to proceed differently, but in as precise a way. Herbert, wishing to learn everything he could, followed the engineer to the beach. Pencroft, Nab, and the reporter remained behind and occupied themselves in different ways. Cyrus Harding had provided himself with a straight stick, 12 feet long, which he had measured as exactly as possible by comparing it with his own height, which he knew to a hair. Herbert carried a plumb line, which Harding had given him. That is to say, a simple stone fastened to the end of flexible fiber. Having reached the spot about 20 feet from the edge of the beach and nearly 500 feet from the cliff, which rose perpendicularly, Harding thrust the pole 2 feet into the sand, and watching it up carefully, he managed by means of the plumb line to erect it perpendicularly with the plane of the horizon. That done, he retired the necessary distance. When lying on the sand, his eye glanced at the same time at the top of the pole and the crash of the cliff. He carefully marked the place with a little stick. Then, addressing Herbert, "Do you know the first principles of geometry?" he asked. "Slightly, Captain," replied Herbert, who did not wish to put himself forward. "You remember what are the properties of two similar triangles?" "Yes," replied Herbert, "their homolog sides are proportionate." "Well, my boy, I have just constructed two similar right-angled triangles. The first, the smallest, has four sides the perpendicular pole, the distance which separates the little stick from the foot of the pole, and my visual array for hypotenuse. The second has four sides the perpendicular cliff, the height of which we wish to measure, the distance which separates the little stick from the bottom of the cliff, and my visual ray also forms its hypotenuse, which proves to be prolongation of that of the first triangle." "Ah, Captain, I understand," cried Herbert. "As the distance from the stick to the pole is the distance from the stick to the base of the cliff, so is the height of the pole to the height of the cliff." "Just so, Herbert," replied the engineer, "and when we have measured the two first distances, knowing the height of the pole, we shall only have a sum in proportion to do, which will give us the height of the cliff, and will save us the trouble of measuring directly. The two horizontal distances were found out by means of the pole, whose length above the sand was exactly 10 feet. The first distance was 15 feet between the stick and the place where the pole was thrust into the sand. The second distance between the stick and the bottom of the cliff was 500 feet. These measurements finished, Cyrus Harding and Lad returned to the Chimneys. The engineer then took a flagstone which he had brought back from one of his previous excursions, a source light on which it was easy to trace figures with a sharp shell. He then proved the following proportions, from which it was proved that the granite cliff measured 333 feet in height. Cyrus Harding took the instrument which he had made the evening before, the space between its two legs giving the angular distance between the star Alpha and the horizon. He measured it very exactly, the opening of this angle on a circumference which he divided into 360 equal parts. Now, this angle, by adding to it the 27 degrees which separated Alpha from the Antarctic pole, and by reducing to the level of the sea the height of the cliff on which the observation had been made, was found to be 53 degrees. These 50 degrees being subtracted from 90 degrees, distance from the pole to the equator, there remained 37 degrees. Cyrus Harding concluded, therefore, that Lincoln Island was situated on the 37th degree of the southern latitude, or taking into consideration through the imperfection of the performance an error of 5 degrees, they must be situated between the 35th and the 40th parallel. There was only the longitude to be obtained, and the position of the island would be determined. The engineer hoped to attain this the same day at 12 o'clock, at which moment the sun would pass the meridian. It was decided the Sunday should be spent in a walk, or rather an exploring expedition to that side of the island between the north of the lake and Short Gulf, and if there was time, they would push their discoveries to the northern side of Cape Cole, Cape South Mandible. They would breakfast on the Downs and not return till evening. At 8:30, the little Bane was following the edge of the channel. On the other side, on Safety Islet, numerous birds were gravely strutting. They were divers, easily recognized by their cry, which much resembles the braying of a donkey. Pencroft only considered them in an eatable point of view, and learned with some satisfaction that their flesh, though blackish, is not bad food. Great amphibious creatures could also be seen crawling on the sand, seals doubtless who appeared to have chosen the islet for a place of refuge. It was impossible to think of those animals in an elementary point of view, for their own oily flesh is detestable. However, Cyrus Harding observed them attentively, and without making known his idea, he announced to his companions that very soon they would pay a visit to the island. The beach was strewn with innumerable shells, some of which would have rejoiced the heart of a conchologist. There were, among others, the Phasiania, the Terra Bruta, etc. But what would be of more use was the discovery by Nab at low tide of a large oyster bed among the rocks, nearly 5 miles from the Chimneys. Nab would not have lost his day, cried Pencroft, looking at the spacious oyster bed. It is really a fortunate discovery, said the reporter, as it is said that each oyster produces yearly from 50 to 60,000 eggs. We shall have an inexhaustible supply there. Only I believe that the oyster is not very nourishing, said Herbert. No, replied Harding. The oyster contains very little nitrogen, and if a man lived exclusively on them, he would have to eat not less than 15 to 16 dozen a day. Capital, replied Pencroft. We might swallow dozens and dozens without exhausting the bed. Shall we take some for breakfast? And without waiting for a reply to this proposal, knowing that it would be approved of, the sailor and Nap detached a quantity of the mollusks. He put them in a sort of net of Hibiscus fiber, which Nap had manufactured, and which already contained food. They then continued to climb the coast between the Downs and the sea. From time to time, Harding consulted his watch so as to be prepared in time for the solar observation, which had to be made exactly at midday. All that part of the island was very barren, as far as the point which closed Union Bay, and which had received the name of Cape South Mandible. Nothing could be seen there but sand and shells mingled with debris of lava. A few seabirds frequented this dazzle coast, gulls, great albatrosses, as well as wild duck, for which Pencroft had a great fancy. They tried to knock some over with an arrow, but without results, for they seldom perched, and he could not hit them on the wing. This led the sailor to repeat to the engineer, "You see, Captain, so long as we have not one or two fowling pieces, we shall never get anything." "Doubtless, Pencroft," replied the reporter, "but it depends on you. Procure us some iron for the barrels, steel for the hammers, saltpeter, coal and sulphur for powder, mercury and nitric acid for the filament, and lead for the shots, and the captain will make us first-rate guns." "Oh," replied the engineer, "we might no doubt find all these substances on the island, but a gun is a delicate instrument and needs very particular tools. However, we shall see later." "Why," cried Pencroft, "were we obliged to throw overboard all the weapons we had with us in the car, all our implements, even our pocket knives?" "But if we had not thrown them away, Pencroft, the balloon would have thrown us to the bottom of the sea," said Herbert. "What you say is true, my boy," replied the sailor. Then passing to another idea, "Think," said he, "how astounded Jonathan Forster and his companions must have been when the next morning they found the place empty and the machine flown away." "I'm utterly indifferent about knowing what they may have thought," said the reporter. "It was all my idea, that," said Pencroft, with a satisfied air. "A splendid idea, Pencroft," replied the Gideon Spilett, laughing, "and which has placed us where we are. I would rather be here than in the hands of the Southerners," cried the sailor, "especially since the captain has been kind enough to come and join us again." "So would I truly," replied the reporter. "Besides, what do we want? Nothing. If that is not everything," replied Pencroft, laughing and shrugging his shoulders. "But some day or other we shall find means of going away." Okay. I'm gonna have to think about reading this book to the end because I mean it's taking forever and it's getting boring. I mean, I really, really, really feel that the author doesn't really make its story interesting. Instead, he's just dragging like story like um he's making description of some part like in detail. I mean, he shouldn't have done that. I mean, he could have done it differently. He could have written it differently, but then he made it in a way that's a bit boring. I'm not trying to mock him or anything. It's just the way I feel. Okay. I don't mean to intimidate like the author or the any other people related to this book. Hmm. Just my personal feeling. Okay. Okay. Today's the end of the day, and I'll see you tomorrow. And bye.